I better go. I'm early. Hello. Hi, Chris.
Frank, you're early.
Well, of course. Welcome to Speaking Frankly. Well, here we are. The legislature is in session, and we have lots of important issues that we need as public citizens to reflect on and to do something about. And it's my privilege today to have Merilyn Reeves, who is the president of the Friends of Yamhill County. Merilyn, great to have you on Speaking Frankly.
Thank you, Frank, and everybody ought to appreciate that what you've done over the years to bring this show to the McMinnville, to the viewers here in McMinnville. It's really important.
Well, thank you. You know, that's the great thing about Community Access TV.
That's right. That's right.
That we, the citizens who have concerns and want to share, can do so.
That's right.
And now, we've known each other for a number of years. And tell me, how long have you lived in Oregon?
Well, we've been out here about 22 years.
22 years.
But I grew up on a dirt farm in Idaho, so I don't consider that too far from Oregon.
No, Idaho isn't. So now, you've also lived in different places around the country, haven't you?
Well, yes, that's the... jobs take you different places, and jobs took my husband different places. We lived 17 years in the state of Maryland. I did a great deal of work there on the Chesapeake Bay when I was out there. I've worked on a wide range of environmental issues. We've lived in, as I say, I grew up in Idaho. We've lived in Texas.
Yes.
We lived in South Dakota, that beautiful flat country. We lived in Minnesota.
Yes.
But you know, Oregon tops them all.
Oregon has something special, doesn't it?
Oregon has something very, very special, and it provides a quality of life that I hope the citizens truly understand. And in McMinnville, you look around the outside of McMinnville, and that is so true.
Well, I've been here now, you know, for what, 36 years. 36 years. I've taught at Linfield College, taught first in 1967, 68, then went back to Chicago for 2 years, then came back in 70, and I've been here ever since. And I love it. I love it. Now, one of the things I know that we enjoy so much of natural beauty. And when you think of nature here in this place with the ocean, with the mountains, with the forest land, with the magnificent river valleys, I mean, fantastic agricultural land, pretty hard to beat.
Well, that's true, and when you look at the 30-plus years when Oregon's land use planning has been in effect, we've provided houses for the people who have moved in. I have moved in here. We have provided an opportunity to walk the beach and know that it belongs to us because Tom McCall said, "This is where we are, this is our property." This is all part of the heritage of a land use planning system that the citizens of this state demanded, worked hard to get, participated in terms of local planning. Individuals who lived here during that period of time will talk about the countless meetings that they attended as they looked at what should be our long-range goals and our comprehensive plan. This is all part of the historical context of what we call Oregon's land use planning system.
You know, and that, when we put it that way, Oregon's plan, you know, land use planning system, planning takes people.
Planning takes people, it takes economics, because you have to provide for the jobs for those people. We are so fortunate here to have some of the richest soils in the world that surround McMinnville in this Willamette Valley. And here, this agricultural that surrounds McMinnville, and it surrounds us. Yeah. It has produced jobs. We're about I think that Yamhill County ranks about the 6th in the state in the millions of dollars of economic assets with our agricultural base. Certainly the vineyards are internationally known now, but all this comes from the soil, and it comes from, again, part of our land use planning, in which it's been a conscious effort that the citizens have made over the years to say, this is what we want in the community we live in.
That's part of it, isn't it? That is how we as people relate to the land, how we as people relate to the environment. It's not a matter that we can take the environment or the land for granted.
That's true, and in the last election, people voted on what was called Measure 37, and it was billed as something which would provide fairness for our property owners who owned property before Oregon's land use laws went into effect. And Oregon's voters are fair people, and they said, yes, we want fairness, you know. Yes. Unfortunately, the law, as many of our laws are, contains a great many confusing aspects, and in its worst case scenario, which we hope will not occur, is really the beginning of tearing down the land use protections that we have had in this state for many years, and for tearing down that which makes our communities more livable, that ensures that our agricultural production will continue. And we're very concerned about how Measure 37 will be put into effect and what it will do as far as this community is concerned.
Well, I've noticed now in the last week a number of articles, essays, letters to the editor, reviews. In fact, there was another quite an extensive article this morning in the Oregonian about Measure 37. And in terms of 37, now that was passed by us in the state, state elections. But what is the relationship between state power and county power?
Well, it's interesting that Oregon has what are called state laws, state land use planning, and that was part of Governor Tom McCall's whole responsibility in setting up our state land use planning. So in Yamhill County and in the city of McMinnville and other cities across the state and counties, we operate under state law. And the state law, of course, is put into effect by our legislature and implemented through state agencies, but it is also has a local base here. So at the present time, under Measure 37, voters voted that if you owned property before there were any of these laws in effect, then you could, if those laws had in some way affected the value of that property, then you could demand compensation. And if where there was no compensation, the county taxpayers didn't have any compensation or money to give you because of this perceived loss of value, then at that time the county would have to say, or the state would have to say, well, you just don't have to abide by those rules and those laws. That's what Measure 37 did, and the voters passed that, and it is law. The problem is there's just all sorts of problems with how it's going to be implemented. And we have just begun that process here in the county, and you're going to be reading more and more stories about Measure 37.
Yes. Because
it's a complicated bill, and it has many items in it that I think were unforeseen at the time that it went into effect. And one of the most serious items, in my view, is it does not require any public notification to neighbors.
Now what is that?
So if you had a piece of property and you owned it in the 1960s, and all these laws came along and they were passed, and you say, but wait a minute, you took away my value, and you go down and you apply and you say, I want to develop that property. I've got 20 acres out here and I want to put 12 houses on it, okay? Under the law as it was passed, and under the provision that Yamhill County agreed in its ordinance, there will be no public hearing on that.
There will be no public hearing?
No, and no notification of the public.
No notification of the people who are going to be affected?
Next door, no. Now they can do that, and this is something that they can maybe on a case-by-case basis, or we're not exactly sure how they're going to decide to do this. But in Yamhill County, they can, the county commissioners, if two of them agree, they can agree to hold a public hearing. And once they agree to hold a public hearing, then the neighbors will be notified. Well, naturally, we would like to have neighbors notified on every single one of these claims.
Of course.
You're talking mostly about rural areas. And we don't have particularly good roads in our rural areas. And almost every time neighbors want to have, say, 2 or 3 new homes up this gully or over here across this, people say, but what about the road? Who's going to maintain the road? There isn't any money in the county to maintain that road. And so I think the neighbors are very important and need to be notified on all of these. Now we have the very first proposal that came in on Measure 37 has broad implications for the quality of life here in McMinnville. This is a proposal to have 332 acres right outside McMinnville, right out there on Hill Road, to have that property developed for an unspecified number of residential and commercial development.
Now let me hear that again.
Okay.
We've got how many acres?
Over 300.
Over 300 acres.
Right.
And the proposal is?
And it's not in the urban growth boundary. It's not in the city limits, okay? And the proposal, as the applicant put on the form, was for an unspecified number.
So we don't know what that person
No.
plans to do with those 330 acres.
Right, but residential, commercial, whatever. Nor do we know if all of the requirements, and again, I'll go back to roads, with all the requirements, if all of those have to be waived. And now we leave it up to a landowner who says, look, I can do anything I want on my land because this is what this law says. You know, we hope that's not the case, but until we have some legal determinations on it, that's the way many people are reading it.
You know, it's interesting because, as a matter of fact, in terms of what happens to property, we're affecting not just the business of building roads, we're affecting the business of having a proper water supply, the business of having proper sewage disposal, the business of having proper governance and police protection. There are all kinds of things.
Well, and I think we have to look at who bears the burden. And this will be outside the city. So if in fact this development occurs outside the city, they won't have to pay any of the city system development charges, which a developer inside the city has to pay to ensure that you can put in the proper roads. They will not be paying for the library, which the city of McMinnville uses a great deal. Yamhill County does not have a system development charge for roads for new development, and they'll be coming down Baker Creek Road. And Baker Creek Road comes right through McMinnville, if I remember correctly, last time I was on there. And I think that, therefore, the citizens of McMinnville need to know about this proposal, need to be notified, and there needs to be a public hearing on this to determine just what does this mean.
You know, the interesting thing is that we always, all of us, affect each other in what we do. It's part of the importance of being a citizen to understand how our action is not just our action, but affects others, either positively or negatively. Why would you ever allow this kind of development without public hearings and a public discussion of those potentials and effects that will take place.
Well, I think you should go to that pronoun you just used. You said, why would you allow it? Well, I wouldn't allow it if I were a county commissioner of Yamhill County, which I'm not and don't intend to be. This is up to our county commissioners. It's the county commissioners who approved the law. 2 of the county commissioners said will not have any hearings on Measure 37 claims.
They said what?
That's in the law. No hearings on Measure 37 claims. There's a provision in the law that was passed here in the county that said we could, if two of us vote, we could have one, but they did not envision any 300-acre development. I think at that time they envisioned that somebody might have owned 20 acres and always wanted to put a house on it, and because of provisions in Oregon's land use laws or whatever, did not allow them. And so, one house, but even one house should tell, the neighbors should know.
Absolutely.
Even one house. And so this is now Yamhill County ordinance, no public hearings. This is now in the provision of the state law, which the voters passed, Measure 37, that there's no requirement for a public hearing. And so one of the things that we think need to be done is to get that corrected and say, wait a minute. Measure 37, which allows one neighbor to do things to his property because he owned it a long time ago that another neighbor cannot do who just bought it 6 years ago.
Yes.
See?
Yes.
This requires a little bit of public understanding and public information and a public hearing. Let us talk about it is where I am.
Well, and a public concern about the way in which we are related to each other. We affect each other, and we need to be responsible with and for each other.
Well, we would hope so. When you start talking about pocketbook issues, and property values are pocketbook issues,
Sure.
Sometimes worrying about us living in the same community goes out the window. We're more concerned about making a buck and making certain that we can do what we want to do. I think we'd all love to do what we want to do. But in a society, we operate with laws and rules, and that's the only way that societies can exist. And in a democracy, we want to operate with them in the open.
Yes.
With full transparency. That means that if we don't agree with the decision, at least we've had an opportunity to hear and to understand what it's going to mean. If we don't agree with it, that's a democracy, okay, but at least the opportunity to hear and to understand.
Now, Merilyn, earlier in your own career, weren't you involved with the League of Women Voters?
Well, yes, for many, many, many years, and I still am.
Yes.
I'm very proud of that organization.
Well, I am too. What are some of the things that the League now is concerned about in terms of the state of Oregon?
Well, I can assure you that one of the things they're very concerned about is this very issue we're talking about. Whether or not in our land use planning in Corvallis or Eugene or in Bend or wherever, will there be uniformity so we know that all Measure 37 claims will have a public hearing before a decision is made on them? That's a top priority for the League of Women Voters, simply because we believe in democracy and we believe in open government.
It seems to me that's what we ought to be after right now, to make sure that things don't happen that are really tragic in terms of the future and in terms of the present.
Well, sometimes, they say you don't miss the water till your well runs dry. Mm-hmm. I certainly hope that when it comes to the quality of life, the economic assets that we have here in Yamhill County, it's a beautiful county. It's a productive county.
Yes.
It is a county whose communities continue to work for a quality of life. I think McMinnville has done this consistently, okay. And Measure 37 could undo that. And it could undo it very rapidly. Individuals who have lived in other states, I'll take my own state of Idaho. I grew up there, graduated from high school there. I go back to Boise and I try to find Boise and I can't get there because every 80-acre tract from Meridian on to Boise has been developed into some kind of a gated community.
Yes.
Sprawling communities. Well, they provide housing, yes, but they also increase your infrastructure costs of running your water, your sewer lines, etc. I think that Oregon has a better way. I think that Oregon has shown that we can have compact communities, livable communities.
That's the point, isn't it?
It's
livable communities.
Livable. We have individuals here in McMinnville who say all of our children should be able to live close enough to a school to walk to it. And yet where do we decide to build our high schools? We want to build them way on the outside of town with a big campus and a big parking lot. So, because all the high school students and all the teachers have to drive to it, you know. Well, I'm not going to solve that problem, and I don't think anybody is in terms of the way we do our land use. But certainly, the more we can make our communities livable and the neighborhoods so we know each other,
Yes.
I think we have a much better livability. And that's really the bottom line for Oregon's land use planning system. And that's what we're so worried about as Measure 37 as we continue to look at how it's going to be implemented.
Well, I remember you mentioned Governor McCall, and I remember how involved he was in terms of environmental questions and issues and policies, and how he encouraged people, what was that famous saying? We encourage you to come, but please don't stay. Now,
Well, that was before my time. I'm not sure he said that, but
That's
and
reported
we
to-
have had a lot of people who have come and stayed, and we still have.
Of course, and that was my point, that the idea here, however, is not to have the kind of unprincipled growth that California suffered and some other places in this country where you didn't have proper control in terms of land use and development.
There are enemies of that kind of control, and clearly those individuals who have never supported land use planning, who've always felt that they have a right to do whatever they want with their property, I believe, misled the voters with Measure 37 as an issue of fairness. I too would like to make certain that we're fair.
Yes.
And I would like to make certain that when we have laws, they are the same for me as they are for my neighbor,
Yes.
you know. And if, a good example, a farmer up there in Washington County, he and his family have always farmed. They've owned the land for a long time. In the meantime, they see the growth coming through the process of planning. They're around Hillsboro. So they decided that some of them ought to go buy some land someplace else to farm. Keep the land they've got, you understand. So they move out to an area, and here they just moved out there in the last 5 years. Well, Measure 37 is passed. All of a sudden they discover all their neighbors who had been there longer than the time they've owned the property will be able to develop their farmland right next to them, and it puts them right back where they were.
Yes.
In other words, agriculture is an industry, and we have industrial zoning just like we do for industry itself, and for commercial, and for residential, right?
Right.
And it's very important that we not destroy that zoning aspect. And yet, if we allow sprawling subdivisions to occur outside city limits, outside urban growth boundaries, that sprawl will affect the economy of our agricultural production.
See, it affects the economy of agriculture. It also affects our lives as residents in these communities like McMinnville. That is one of the things I love McMinnville, because there is a sense of community here.
Well, we have a little congestion in McMinnville, I think you would have to admit.
Yes.
And that's a result of us, people,
Yes.
okay. I will contend that you haven't seen congestion yet.
No.
Until you see the kind of planning, the kind of development that may be allowed to take place as a result of Measure 37.
37.
And the 300 acre is just the tip of the iceberg. I think there is the presumption that, well, we'll have a court case. Oh, that'll stop it all so reasonable people can sit down. I'm not sure there's going to be. There is a Supreme Court challenge on the basis of fairness, but that's going to take forever. And, but that doesn't stop the process. Right now, the process is going to go through. There are going to be many that will perhaps get, we're quite certain they will get approval here in the county, but these are state laws, so the property owners have to apply to the state also for waive it or get compensation. And so I think that when we look at what we foresee in the future, there's a lot of confusion out here. It's a full employment act for a lot of attorneys.
Well, I guess so.
So that industry is going to be pretty productive for a while, you know, as they fight over some what does this mean parts. The law has a lot of uncertainty.
Yeah, it's actually a poorly written piece of legislation.
Those who wanted the law said no, that this law is tightly written to do what we want it to do.
Yeah, but what they want it to do has nothing to do with the effects on others.
It has, in my view, it has nothing to do with fairness and equity. It has nothing to do with quality of life in Oregon. It has nothing to do